Yesterday, Louisiana became the latest state to pass a bill restricting women's access to abortions, joining Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi, and Ohio. Breaking with the national party agenda, the state's Democratic governor is ready to sign the measure into law. Governor John Bel Edwards said in a statement, "In 2015, I ran for governor as a pro-life candidate after serving as a pro-life legislator for 8 years. As governor, I have been true to my word and my beliefs on this issue. But it's also my sincere belief that being pro-life means more than just being pro-birth."
In addition to the actions by state legislatures, the future of abortion restrictions also made their way to the Supreme Court. In Box v. Planned Parenthood, the court upheld the requirement for fetal remains to be buried, but did not reinstate a ban on abortions that are based on on race, sex, or disability of the fetus. March for Life President Jeanne Mancini applauded the decision. We welcome the Supreme Court's ruling today in favor of a provision requiring more dignified treatment of human remains following the tragedy of abortion. We look forward to the day, too, when the court will consider the use of abortion to eliminate persons on the basis of race, sex, or disability. Here to expand on that is Jeanne herself. Jeanne, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
So what is just your overall reaction to these two decisions that came down, one having to do with the disposal of fetal remains and the other then, of course, on this issue of sex or other characteristics selective abortion?
Well, mostly good news. On the question of the disposal of aborted babies, we're grateful that the Supreme Court essentially recognized the inherent dignity of the human person in doing so. I mean, it's tragic, of course, that these little ones have lost their lives to abortion, but at the very least, the remains will be treated with value and with respect. You know, they won't be sadly thrown into medical waste with needles and animal carcasses that were used in the laboratory, et cetera. So that's good news. We did.
I'm sorry, how early does this bill require those remains to be buried? Or
it's not so much about the specific burial. This is just they can't be treated as medical waste, so to speak.
So how early?
At any stage.
So let me ask you this. So then if a woman had a miscarriage, would she also be required to bury and have a service for the remains of her miscarriage?
Well, that's a great question. Many women miscarry and they don't even realize it. I can speak to that myself. But
yeah, me too.
So unfortunately, you wouldn't even understand that you're passing the child in the very earliest stages. But a woman, of course, who's gone to an abortion clinic to get the surgical procedure of abortion, those remains have to be treated with dignity.
So what's the difference between someone who passes remains at home and someone who miscarries at home and someone who goes to a facility? Should the women at home be required to retrieve the remains from wherever they have retrieved the miscarriage pregnancy from wherever they are and then be required to do something with those?
So what you're raising, Jamal, is the question of chemical abortion, I believe. So
no, I'm saying a woman goes to sleep at night and then she goes to the restroom and she passes her pregnancy into the bathroom, into the toilet. Is she required to retrieve that from the toilet and then bury it?
Well, that is a human person with dignity, and I think
is it a person that's 6 weeks,
women,
8 weeks, 10 weeks?
I believe that from the moment of conception, it is a person. I know, so our theme for the March for Life this year is pro-life is pro-science, unique from day one. At the moment of conception, that little person has all of their DNA for the rest of life. So
the woman is required to retrieve them and then bury them.
My own experience is that any woman who's suffered a miscarriage suffers, tremendously over that and knows that that's a little human person.
But is the woman required to retrieve the remains and then?
Well, the woman's not at a medical facility, Jamal, if she's at home. This has to do with regulating a medical facility's disposal of human remains.
Okay, so let's say she has. So
these are different things.
Well, let's say she has a miscarriage in a medical facility. So you're required.
Yes, they would then, if they had a medical facility with a miscarriage and they knew, and they would treat those remains separately from, as she pointed out, syringes.
Well, I'm curious about this because I think the burden
it seems like your underlying question is when does life begin?
No, my underlying question is what about the feelings of this person, of this woman, who is going through a pretty traumatic experience, but I'm sure you would agree with it's a pretty traumatic experience. What about what happens to her and the law requiring her to have to do something that she may not be in favor of?
Well, I don't know for sure. I mean,
do you care?
Of course I care. I mean, I'm pro-woman, I'm pro-life, but I certainly appreciate you asking about this. What I would say is that it's been my own experience studying the psychology of this, that when a woman herself has become the abortionist by taking chemical abortion, or she does lose a child through miscarriage, it's even more traumatic seeing that child pass on her own at home.
So is there a difference between the remains, as you call them, in the hospital than the ones that are at home? Is there a difference between those two?
No.
So why is there a difference? So then why is there a difference? Why is there a difference?
Seems like we're getting really tied up in these small little details.
Why is there a difference?
No,
hold on one second. Why is there a difference? Why is there a difference between what's required to do with the remains, as you call them, in the facility versus the remains in the home? Why is there a difference between the two requirements? Well, if a child dies at home that's 2 years old, there's not a difference in what happens to that 2-year-old.
Right. What do you think?
No, I'm asking you. You're the one that's proposing and supporting the Supreme Court judgment.
Right. So it was a law that was passed in Indiana that now has been supported by the Supreme Court. So I believe that a person is a person from the moment of conception, and that they should have inherent human value and dignity. They should have the right to life. They shouldn't be aborted. And certainly if they're aborted, at the very least, they deserve the right of their remains being treated with respect.
I think you're putting a requirement on a medical procedure that is not the requirement you put on the same.
Abortion isn't like removing a wart. It's a deeply invasive surgery, and we're talking about two people here, the mom and the child. So you may agree to disagree with me, but we certainly do agree to disagree.
All right, I think there is some sound from what happened in Illinois yesterday we want to take a look at.
Neighbors in Illinois who hear the news around the country and worry that this war on women is coming to Illinois, I say not on my watch. To the people in Missouri and Alabama and Georgia and Kentucky and Mississippi and Ohio, I say not on my watch.
Jeannie, what do you say in response to this?
So just to clarify for your viewers, what we're talking about here are heartbeat bills that are passing. And so we've had a number of heartbeat bills passed at the level of the states in the last few weeks. And it's been really fascinating, I mean, frankly, to watch this. So not on my watch. Well, I'll be honest, when I saw New York pass really extreme legislation in late January, I was shocked and appalled by that. And when I saw in Virginia the governor come out and essentially advocate along with Delegate Tran that abortion should be allowed up until the moment of the baby actually being born, I was appalled. And not only me, but that's out of touch with mainstream America. 8 out of 10 Americans would limit abortion at most to the first 3 months of pregnancy. So on both sides of the issue now, we're seeing different approaches. These heartbeat bills essentially recognize the humanity of an unborn child. That's not an extreme thing, that's a dignified thing. And at the very least, it educates us about science and technology and really how they're on the side of life.
Do you think what occurs at 6 or 8 weeks is actually a heartbeat?
I do. Why don't you watch it on an ultrasound?
I have several times.
So do you not think that's a heartbeat?
Well, it turns out that Wired magazine just wrote an entire article with quoting doctors, not people like us who are just sitting here talking, saying that it's not actually a heartbeat because there isn't a heart. It is the beginning of the cardiovascular system, and you're in tubes that are coming together and pulsing, right? So it's not an actual heart. So I think the question then becomes, what about the people who don't even know that they're pregnant in 6 weeks or 8 weeks?
So I think one thing that's been interesting on the other side is
do they not have a right to talk to their pastors, talk to their doctors, and talk to their family and friends before they make a decision?
But for so long, we've heard that a baby is a lifeless blob of tissue, and these bills make it so clear that it's a human being.
But the bills are written by legislators and politicians, not by physicians.
Many physicians have had feedback on some of these bills, so you may not agree with them, but what gets harder and harder is for folks who are pro-abortion to be able to say, this is not a child. Basically, you have to be able to articulate why it's okay to kill a child with a heartbeat at 6 weeks at this stage in the game, and that gets harder and harder to do.
All righty. What did you think about the response on the Supreme Court's response specifically on sex-selective abortion?
Yeah, thanks, Buck, for coming back to that. It was such an important decision. So we were saddened that the Supreme Court didn't weigh on this. I would highly recommend to your viewers that they would check out Clarence Thomas's concurring opinion. It was incredible. What I think we really need to be careful about, and he wrote at length, is the fact that abortion has the potential for becoming eugenics manipulation in this country. And not only potential, but this is really happening in different ways. So for example, young little ones who are tested positively for Down syndrome are disproportionately targeted for abortion. In the United States, 85% of those little ones will not be brought to term. In Iceland, they brag about the eradication of people with Down syndrome. Okay, you can also consider African Americans. So the CDC abortion surveillance report, which is basically data about abortion, tells us that African Americans are disproportionately targeted for abortion. So they make up over 30% of people who are getting abortions, but only 11% of the population according to the Census Bureau. In New York City, if you're an African American baby, you are more likely to be aborted than actually born. And then lastly, on sex selection, so we know that we're missing a whole population of people in Asia, 160 million women. There was a wonderful book that came out about this a few years ago. But even in the United States, going back to the CDC surveillance reports, certain populations absolutely target sexes for abortion. When it's not a boy, sadly, that little one is aborted, sometimes because that's not what they wanted in their family and with their traditions. So this is a real problem, and the Supreme Court's going to have to weigh into this. They created a right to abortion, and they're going to ethically have to deal with this in some capacity.
Can I ask you a question about the other things on your agenda other than abortion? Your concern for life, how much money and time do you guys spend taking care of babies once they come out of the womb?
So we work really closely with the entire pro-life movement. There was a phenomenal thread on Twitter because a woman asked this very question, hey, pro-lifers, what do you actually do to save people and to help them once they've been born? And Jamal, I would strongly recommend you take a look because it's easy to use these talking points.
I'm curious.
If she were a heart surgeon and she was trying to fix people's hearts, would the question be, well, what do you do when they go home? Do you make sure that they have like a healthy career and lifestyle? I mean,
but there is a whole organization of people who care about heart disease who focus on what people do when they go home. And your doctors do tell you, here's what you do to keep from.
But I'm saying, if she were the doctor, the question wouldn't be, what happens when you save a person's heart?
But she's a lobbyist
I'm actually not a lobbyist.
Maybe you're not a lobbyist.
So we have a
maybe not a lobbyist, but you do
called the
represent a
March for Life
nonprofit organization here that cares about these issues. So I'm asking you here, as one of the co-hosts, I'm asking you, what do you all do to take care of lives once they come out?
So the March for Life.
Because that will become an enticement.
Hey, Jamal, will you let me answer the question?
Yes. I will let you answer the question.
Thank you. So the March for Life,
I'm not true.
Whoa, settle down.
I'm actually a big fan of truth, and science and technology, which are on the side of life, by the way. So anyways, the March for Life, our mission is very much focused on running the biggest pro-life protest every January. We are 7 staff and we're very modestly focused. Anybody who's run an organization knows that mission creep is going to ruin you. So our focus is very much on protecting life before it's born.
So you don't do anything for life.
Jamal, I thought you promised you were going to let me finish my question.
I did let you finish your sentence.
We work very closely with other organizations that work to protect the inherent dignity of the human person from conception to natural death.
Well, Jeanne,
that is not our mission.
I'll see you there next year. Thanks so much for coming.
I look forward to that.
Thank you. Coming up, did the president want the USS McCain out of his sight during his state visit to Japan? There's a funny side of Mueller's national address.
And even more Mueller time, including whether and when Democrats are calling for the president's impeachment. Which ones are doing that? We've got more of that when Rising continues.